Welcome to Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of those pages. And today we have a special guest, the distinguished historian Allen Guelzo.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Professor Guelzo is the Thomas W. Smith Distinguished Research Scholar and Director of the Initiative on Politics and Statesmanship at the James Madison Program at Princeton University. He is one of the foremost American historians of the Civil War, winning many prizes for his scholarship, particularly on Abraham Lincoln. But our subject today is a little different. It's about his new project on Western civilization, along with fellow historian James Hankins. Professor is writing The Golden Thread, a history of the Western tradition. It's intended to be a 2-volume project covering more than 1,000-year history between the Battle of Marathon, when the Greeks resisted the Persians, through the Renaissance and then on to the 21st century. Needless to say, a pretty giant undertaking. But one, in my view, that is much needed given the declining knowledge and public confidence in the Western tradition. And I should add that our reviewer, Megan Gurdon, gave The Golden Thread a rave review recently, making me very eager to read it. So welcome, Professor Guelzo. Great to have you here. Thanks.
That's great to be here, Paul.
So let me ask, you've written a lot of books focusing on other themes, but why undertake this large a project? Because there have been other histories of the Western tradition. Why this one? Why now?
Because I think we're at a moment of questioning about the Western tradition. Because I inhabit that Western tradition along with my co-author, James Hankins. Because Hankins and I have known each other for over 50 years. We went to high school together.
Oh, really? Interesting.
We were in marching band together. And we have, people ask, how long did it take you to write this? And I say, well, actually, we've been writing it for the last 5 decades. Because every time we get together, the kind of questions that are captured in The Golden Thread are the substance of our discussions. And it has just rambled over the years freely over the landscape. His specialty deals with classical history. He covers the ground from ancient Greece up to the first inklings of the Renaissance. I take over from there. I deal with the modern world. Mm-hmm. And between the two of us, we have just had this ongoing dialogue for these many decades. It struck us back in 2020, maybe we should do something with this. Because the need is there, because this is a moment of a crisis of confidence in what we might call the Western tradition. The Western tradition is our term rather than saying Western civilization. And that's a technical distinction because Western civilization is really several civilizations. It begins with Greece, it goes to Rome, it goes through the Middle Ages, it goes through the Enlightenment. But in that respect, what we usually call Western Civ is really a tradition that embraces at least those 4 phases of civilized order. Mm-hmm. So there's a moment when we're dealing here with a crisis of civilization, when people have lost a great deal in the way of confidence and are reluctant now, hesitant to talk about the guidance of the Western tradition. Sometimes that's a matter of a lack of education. People are simply not being educated in these ways anymore. And many who are being educated are being educated to dislike aspects of the Western tradition, or perhaps, in fact, to blame it entirely, which to a certain extent is the fault of the Western tradition itself. When I'm talking about the West, I really mean Europe, its worldwide appendages, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South America and Central America, Canada. In the last 100 years, the West has managed to trigger 2 enormous world wars, the cost and the suffering of which are almost beyond calculation. Westerners have been, it is true, guilty of some particularly shameless moments in terms of behavior, of exploitation, yes, even oppression. And guilt and pity over those things actually plays a fairly large role in this moment of crisis as people are unsure. It's not difficult to come up with a bill of particulars about the Western tradition. And so people become unsure. Should we really be taking our guidance from this thing called the Western tradition, or from the aspects of civilization that embraces the life, the culture, the history, the literature of the West? It's to that moment that we are trying to speak in the golden thread and to say, no, wait, there is matter of great value in, shall we say, renovating? Shall we say, reappropriating, living, inhabiting this Western tradition? And along with that moment, what do we need to do and how do we need to think to promote that kind of renovation? In the larger sense, that's what the golden thread is all about.
Fascinating. So just to get into, in particular, this lack of confidence issue that you addressed, you write in your book's introduction the following, and I want to ask you to expound on it a bit. You say, "We have seen the spread through our schools and institutions, a malicious form of humility, indistinguishable from self-hatred. This is a humility that humiliates, that seeks to blind Westerners to their magnificent traditions and to bury their noses like misbehaving dogs in their worst offenses," unquote. Now, that's a fairly pungent sentence. First of all, who are you talking about here? I mean, and how did this happen?
Well, if I were to name names, we would be here for a long, long time. You might say that much of this goes back into the last century.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say that even beyond that, you can pick up the threads of this kind of self-criticism, what I think we are describing really as a kind of false humility. But you can pick up the threads of that going back certainly as far as the middle of the 19th century. You pick it up from a number of other cultural commentators. And if I want to drop some names, I would probably cite Marx as one, Nietzsche as another, Spengler as yet another. And we could keep moving this way. But in the most general sense, what we are dealing with are people who at best are recommending a kind of indifference to the Western tradition and to civilization. We are hearing voices that tell us that all real history is about the movement of economic forces. It's all about the acquisition of power. And these are voices that would like us to believe that Western civilization is really no more than a face in the crowd among world civilizations or world cultures. That's at best. At worst, these voices articulate an open hostility to the Western tradition, because Western civilization or civilizations is blamed by them for a host of evils, for genocide, for colonialism, for imperialism, slavery, racism, sexism, as though these were not present in other places. But Western civilization is singled out as being particularly the font and the center that spawns these evils. So in that respect, many voices today are telling us that Western civilization is something that we should actually either avoid or perhaps even repent of. And that is what we have tried to suggest is pointing us in all the wrong directions, pointing us perhaps, in fact, in the direction of what we've called in the introduction to barbarism.
Hmm. Now, the evils you have just described are certainly real in the history of Western civilizations.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
no question.
Yeah, I mean, slavery, the Greeks practiced slavery even as they attempted to create a Athenian democracy, the American founding, obviously, tolerated slavery even as it celebrated the rights of man. And we had to fight a civil war and indeed then a century under Jim Crow to validate those rights of the founding. So, what is your response to those who say that in that respect, the Western tradition is really no different than any of the others, whether it be the Chinese tradition and history or Japanese history, which is certainly rich, culturally rich, and in many ways admirable, or any other across the history of humanity?
Paul, you've actually put your finger on the very reason why it is different. And that is, especially in American history, we fought a civil war over slavery. Now, there have been slave societies from time out of mind. And I'm sorry to have to say it, but there still are. Mm-hmm. And these slave societies have existed over and over again in just about every place that there is anything that you could reasonably call human society. What is unique in the experience of the West is its self-criticism and the fact that we fought a civil war to end slavery. Not, mind you, not a slave insurrection. There have been slave insurrections in the past. You think of Spartacus,
right,
in the age of Rome. And there have been many other such slave insurrections in a variety of places. The Civil War was not a slave insurrection. The Civil War was fought in large measure between people who were not themselves slaves. They were fighting over a principle that said, slavery is wrong. Slavery is a violation of some of the most important things that we believe are part of civilized life. And we are willing to fight a war to bring that evil to an end. There is in the Western tradition a capacity for self-criticism, a capacity for resilience that is not present in so many of these other examples. So yes, it's true. There is slavery. There are these other evils that are present in other places. Does that mean somehow that it's all just the same thing and the West is no different from the others? No, the West is different in an extremely important way. And that is what has sometimes been called the argument for the sake of heaven. The willingness to disagree, the willingness to self-criticize, and the willingness to pay a price to bring that aspect of a society into harmony with the ideals of the civilization.
Interesting. Now, let's talk about those some of those principles that you would attempt to, I think, if I say well, I think you used the word retrieval, so retrieve or revive. What are some of the things that you would attempt to highlight in your work?
Well, I think in that respect, what we want to identify in the Golden Thread as the major components of this Western tradition begin with things like its reverence for the written word. It's not an oral tradition. The Odyssey and the Iliad may have begun that way. But by the time we get to Marathon, which is the place where the Golden Thread begins, we are talking about the importance of the written word. Language, command of literature, being able to put things into writing and communicate that way, that is a very important aspect of the Western tradition. Philosophy, a philosophy especially based on natural law, by the appeal to natural law, which puts it above human decision-making, which makes the conclusions of this applicable to all. All right, that kind of philosophy, that's also an important aspect of this Western tradition. Science and knowledge. This is another vital thing. We take so much for granted, but one key aspect of the Western tradition is its commitment to the pursuit of truth and the accumulation of the result of that pursuit in education being passed on from generation to generation. Another aspect of this is government and law. And within government and law, the impulse for freedom in speaking, in commerce, in simple association of people. Another aspect of this Western tradition that we talk about at very great length and illustrate copiously in both volumes are the arts and music. Because pervading the West is this sense that beauty is something which is ennobling. It's not just an adornment. It is not just sucking up to power, like the sculptor of Ozymandias. Sensing that beauty is something which builds you from within and is kin to truth, that truth and beauty exist side by side. Another characteristic is the important role placed by faith and spirituality in the West, and especially based on monotheism. It's also, and this is not an accident because it's built right into the term, it's a very urban sort of thing. I mean, when we talk about civilization, the very word itself comes from the Latin civis, cities. Civilization does not flourish in nomadic or pastoral environments, and it's really no accident that in the Bible, the ultimate expression of glory and bliss is a city. I mean, it's either Jerusalem, as we find it in the Old Testament, or it is the city which descends from heaven that you find in St. John's Revelation. And then at the very end, I come back to this matter of resilience as a characteristic of the West, this capacity for self-criticism. And when that self-criticism reaches a certain point, compelling Westerners to turn against practices that in other places are mere expressions of power. All of this, I think, goes into making the Western tradition a remarkable and a unique achievement, and one that we should not let slip through our fingers, simply because in many ways Westerners have made mistakes, have committed departures from time to time in these things. Yes, they've committed departures. Yes, there's been genocides. Yes, all of these terrible things. But at the same time, that's also part of recognizing the limitations of humanity itself. What is remarkable in the West is how, with these characteristics, we have been able to deal with the faults of human nature and, so to speak, civilize them.
And build institutions which inculcate and promote and indeed sustain some of these traditions. Most, I just cite the rule of law in particular, the American founding, with its constitutional barriers, checks, and balances that have proven to be remarkably resilient. You mentioned monotheism, and yet, and across the Western history, we know we fought many wars over religious causes in the name of monotheism, and yet, in recent centuries, there was a development of religious pluralism, which tolerated other kinds of religious belief, and indeed were built into the American founding. I assume you would think that is a strength of the Western tradition.
Because in a sense, what we do when we speak about religious toleration is, well, we are not talking about religious indifference. What we're talking about is humility, recognizing our own limits in perceiving what we understand to be truth about God, truth about religion. Western civilization has, as one of its major and I think most attractive aspects, the fact that it is not a worship of power. It is not, even at moments of great religious contest, it is not fundamentally about the destructiveness of religion. And certainly it's not committed to the kind of ugliness that we often see, I'm afraid, in a great deal of modern art and literature and music and architecture. The loss of belief, whether it is in religion or even, frankly, the loss of belief and confidence in science, has paid dividends in the darkest sense, much worse than some of these other terrible moments of contest in life in the Western tradition. I mean, the Western tradition has had several moments of deep failure. After the fall of Rome, I remember the impact made on me as a teenager watching long ago the great Kenneth Clark's Civilization series on what was then educational television. And I remember the phrase that he used to describe the first chapter, by the skin of our teeth. After the fall of Rome, yes, civilization in the West did survive only by the skin of our teeth. Another great moment of challenge was the Great Plague of the 14th century, whose catastrophic impact on European life almost shut down anything you could meaningfully call civilization. And then 300 years later, we did it almost all over again with the 30 Years' War of the 17th century. And that was also a moment that sent up wails of despair. The point is that at each one of these moments of near eclipse, the West learned its lessons and got back up again on its feet. And I think in the larger sense, we would like, Hankins and I would like, the Golden Thread to be part of a similar moment of getting back up on our feet in our own times.
That is a very worthy project. I would just want to highlight that with a quote again from the project, and it said, "The dangers presented." These are your words. "The dangers presented by the neglect of Western history are not trivial. When citizens of Western countries are utterly ignorant of history, as most now are, they are left unarmed against the general hostility to their own tradition that has become so destructive a force in contemporary culture." End quote. Profound statement there. And I guess rather self-conscious commentary on our current predicament, which you just alluded to in your last comments about where we are in our ability to understand the strengths of our tradition as we are confronted with real challenges now to that tradition, both external in terms of authoritarian regimes around the world and other traditions, but also internal, just in terms of lack of confidence in our institutions, lack of trust in those institutions, and even just a fundamental lack of knowledge about where those institutions come from and why we actually have them.
I think one of the tasks of the Golden Thread is to remind us of a basic truth. And that is, who we are is who we were. To remind us that there are wonderful things in the Western tradition that you're not going to find hardly anyplace else. Things like personal freedom and autonomy on an unprecedented scale. Oh, yes, absolutely. Prosperity and freedom from age-old plagues. Yes, yes. Art and literature and music of great beauty. And art which offers not just what you might call entertainment, not just pretty pictures, but art that offers really profound avenues to self-understanding. I mean, these are characteristics of the Western tradition that we talk about at very great length over the course of these two big volumes, and they are big volumes. And I have to say, almost as a caution, even though they are two big volumes, we don't get everything in there.
Well, it'd be very hard to do. Cover 1,000 years, even at 1,000 pages.
But here then are the goals that we lay out for people. What are you finding when you look at this Western tradition? You do find that freedom and autonomy. You do find that prosperity. You do find that beauty and that self-understanding. And it seems to us that recalling people to the fundamental issues of the Western tradition is exactly what will return us to the promotion of those great aspects.
Well, let me finish up here by asking, by bringing this around to the current moment again. I mean, just how much trouble do you think, as you look back at 1,000 years of the Western tradition, and you see the many times where it almost came a cropper with war, disease, and so on. How much trouble are we in now, do you think, of squandering that tradition and being able to sustain it going forward?
I think there's two ways of looking at that. One is to step back and see how much of, let's call it the infrastructure of the Western tradition has spread itself around the world. I remember years ago that Václav Havel, he was accepting an honorary degree at Harvard, talked about how he could sit in a cafe in Singapore and look around him, and it looked like exactly the same kind of thing he might see in almost any place like Prague or London. The look of the West, the structures, the material substance of the West has spread itself in ways that are not going to get rolled back, or at least not rolled back at all easily. So you might say the infrastructure is there, but the confidence, this is the other point, confidence, the spirit of it, the self-doubt that has almost become a fetish of its own. That is the thing which may be the most poisonous. We could be left purely with material infrastructure and no reason for inhabiting it. This was the great problem at the end of the Roman Empire. This very easily came very close to being the problem after the Great Plague. And we may be looking at that today. We may be inhabiting villages that we inherit from earlier ages without knowing how they were built, why they were built, or why we're there. There was a foretaste of this, oddly enough, in H.G. Wells's terrible novel. I don't mean terrible as badly written, but terrible for its message, The Time Machine, where the inventor of the time machine goes forward to a society where people are inhabiting the structures of a world that they don't understand anymore. And the results were genuinely fearful. Are we at a place like that? We may be close to it. Again, that is a reason we wanted to write The Golden Thread, to remind us who we are is who we were.
Fascinating way to sum up. I would just add a personal observation. I spent a fair bit of my career in early career in Asia, in China, Japan, and elsewhere in the Asia Pacific. And what was notable at the time was this was a moment where, especially coming out of the 70s into the 80s, of real Western confidence in a revival of American power, confidence, and so on. And China, in many ways, and the people in China I met trying to aspire to that success. And yet, when I have visited Asia in recent years, it is a very different set of affairs. And the Chinese, in particular, China, communist China now, have a sort of almost a sense of manifest destiny in reviving the Chinese cultural and what they tradition and what they think is their rightful place as the Middle Kingdom and as the dominant power, not merely in the Asia Pacific but around the world. So our own lack of confidence in our own traditions and institutions is especially dangerous in the light of that ascendancy with a pure power like China. I say pure power because I think that is what it is now. Last word to you, Professor.
For those of us who have lived and grown to maturity in an environment surrounded by great ideas, by great art, it can sometimes seem a little incredible that we would walk away so easily from them. And yet I do see that walking away taking place. I do encounter it in people. And I see a great vacuum, and that saddens me. I don't say any of this in any spirit of triumphalism, not in the slightest. It saddens me because there is so much else to human flourishing besides power, besides mere technology, besides the mere day-to-day. One of the things you could say about civilization is that civilization is a breathing space. It's a breathing space for people to do something other than just work to eat or flee from murder and oppression. Civilization gives us that space. I think that's a space we should want to inhabit. I think it's a space of peace. I think it's a space of reconciliation. and the golden thread, picking up on the ancient mythology of that golden thread and Theseus and the Minotaur. I think it's worth following that golden thread to that place of peace, of reconciliation, of joy and beauty and truth. I think that's what we're trying to do.
Professor Allen Guelzo, thank you so much for being here. You have the last word, co-author with historian James Hankins of The Golden Thread, a history of the Western tradition, a tradition much in need of recollection and retrieval. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. We are here every day on Potomac Watch. Usually we talk about current events. Occasionally we do these special interviews. So please join us every day here on Potomac Watch.